Hello, I'm Mark Rodoni. I'm a third year doctoral student in the Department of History here at UC Irvine, and welcome back to the Sasanian speaker series for our third episode. If you haven't had a chance to check out our previous episodes, they are available on the Sasanian YouTube channel. We're looking to have at least one more of these put out this academic year, so please stay tuned. At this point, I'll turn it over to my co-host, Laia Ziai-Begdali, to introduce this week's speaker, or month's speaker.
Thank you, Mark. Hi, I'm Laia Ziai-Begdali, a PhD student at UCI. I'm very excited to introduce to you today's speaker and his latest project. Johnathan Hardy is a PhD student at University of Minnesota and is currently the Jane and Morgan Whitney Fellow at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in the Department of Ancient Near Eastern Art. He is currently finishing his dissertation titled Multivalent Identities, Art, Architecture, and Ritual Between Religious Minorities and the Sasanian Aristocracy, 224 to 650. His project looks to the development of a uniquely Sasanian Christian visual culture in late antiquity. Today, he'll talk about his ongoing project at the Met, where he uses new technologies to document and properly study the collection of Sasanian seals and ceilings in the ancient Near Eastern art department. Hi, John. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Again, thank you so much, Laia and Mark, for having me on. And, it's an absolute honor. So, let's get right into some of the things that I'm kind of working on. So again, I have to thank Laia for this amazing title. I did not come up with it, so all thanks go to her. But as she said, yes, I'm currently working in the Department of Ancient Near Eastern Art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and essentially doing 3D documentation and metrical analysis of all of the Sasanian seals and ceilings. And really, this kind of came about because these are essentially the only publications on the entire collection at the Metropolitan Museum of Art as far as the seals and ceilings go. So there's the one book by Christopher Brunner in 1978, and that's missing a good chunk of seals that have been acquired since then. And that one we'll talk a little bit about in the next slide. We'll talk a little bit about some of the issues with that. And then for the ceilings, essentially there's really only two publications. There's the one by Richard Fry, which has all of the drawings of the ceilings and a first attempt at the translations of all the inscriptions on them. And then Philippe Ginoux has this fantastic article that he really goes in depth onto all of the inscriptions that are on the seals. And that's really all that exists for the sort of actual in-depth study of the seals and the ceilings in the Met's collection. So that's kind of where my impetus came, is when you go to the Met, and as someone working on their dissertation, seals are an incredibly important part of the iconography of the Sasanian Empire. So you go to the Metropolitan's website and you're left with essentially these pictures from the 1960s, 1970s of these very they're scans of 35 millimeter slides. You can't really tell much about them. I mean, we have one that's this kind of in the upper right corner that's incredibly blown up, and you can almost kind of read the inscription, but essentially you just can't, there's no way to really make any sort of arguments off of this. So that was really one of the main reasons for me wanting to sort of take up this 3D documentation project. And another thing is that the measurements of them are they're kind of loose. One thing that I came across is that my measurements that I'm taking are approximately 6% different than Brunner's measurements of the same exact seals. And one of the main issues that I had with Brunner's work is that he only measured the face. So he only measured from the actual impression surface versus the seal itself. So it was really this sort of divorcing the image on the seal versus the actual seal as an object. So that was one of the main things that I really wanted to get into, was having all of the measurements of the seal so someone can look at them and then make, someone far smarter than I can then make these sort of specific and well-formed arguments based off of measurements that just couldn't exist before. The other reason, object preservation and updates on the status of the objects. These are, particularly with the ceilings, they're clay, they can get accidentally damaged, anything like that. So just to kind of update on their condition, and God forbid something horrible happens, I will have a 3D record of these ceilings. Another thing is that introducing seals and ceilings to the public audience. These are fantastic things. And they're so tiny, and particularly with the seals, that a lot of times in museums and just in general, they get overlooked completely. And by creating these 3D models that people can then, play around with and look at from all different angles, that's really, in my opinion, I think that's really going to sort of open up this fascinating area of study to the broader public. Next thing is that open access. All of the things that I'm producing here are completely open access, completely for anyone to use as they wish. It's part of the Metropolitan Museum of Art's open access initiative, and I fully support that. I think that the more people that can get a hand on these objects, these digital objects, to study them, the better that the field will be. And of course, it's fun. It's just a ton of fun. So the main way that I've been going about this is we start with, as you can see in the upper corner here, is with precise measurements. I look at them with jeweler's loops. I get way up close and kind of document every little thing. I have a notebook that is completely full of all of these observations about these objects. So then scholars who are unable to come to the Met Museum and study them themselves in person, they'll have all of these sort of observations that they can then utilize and incorporate into their own work. The next is either 3D scanning with structured light scanning, or photogrammetry, 3D photogrammetry. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but there are two sort of differing techniques that have the same end result. They create a 3D model of this object, of whatever object you're studying. And it really depends on the sort of type of object and what works best. I wish that there was a good rule for what to use when, but I basically have to do photogrammetry and scanning of the same objects just to try and get the best. Where then does this all go? Well, I created this sort of custom form. This is the one for seals that documents everything that I find is important for the holistic documentation of the seals. So we have the overall dimensions, which is something that, as I mentioned previously, has not really been done, particularly with Bruner's work, is that he just measured the cut face extent, as I have it labeled here. He just measured this, and then sometimes the Z axis, so how deep the seal is. So I decided that, we need to have as much measurements as possible, because one of my sort of hopes is that I'll be able to find and match a seal to a ceiling somewhere. And that's kind of one of my main things, is that hopefully that this would happen one day. So that's why I'm taking all of these measurements. I also have looking at the primary motif, describing the motif, what the shape is, the object description itself. So just as a whole, what is the object like? The material description, because a lot of the materials that have been decided, that someone has basically said, yes, that's carnelian. There's no real sort of hard and fast method of identifying them. So describing the material in depth will help us better in the future determine what type of materials these seals are. So the same thing can be said for the ceilings. It's slightly different than the seals, but essentially the same thing is that we have measuring the entire size, the holistic size of the object, so width, length, and height, as well as the primary seal and the secondary seal, as I'm calling. So the primary one is, as explained in these little notes here, for whoever comes after me that wants to continue this, will be able to basically pick up where I left off. The primary seal is the largest seal on a ceiling. The secondary seal is the sort of next largest, and then it goes around from there. And one of the great things is that there's this sort of drawing concordance, is that Richard Fry and Wilkinson have this massive amount of ceilings in their volume that they drew all of the seals. So it's a good way to sort of keep track of what's happening, particularly as the Metropolitan Museum and the Iranian Museum in Tehran has split the collection. So now we can make these sort of concordances between them. And that's, sort of one of the really interesting things. And there's also coloration. So the color of them, there's roughly two different styles, and that could be useful, it could not be, but might as well take the observations when we can. So photogrammetry, as you may know, it's just taking photographs of an object from a bunch of different angles, and this is a 36106, I think, is this seal that's depicted here. But you can see you just take a ton of pictures, and eventually through a program, there's like 3DF Zephyr, Agisoft Metashape, there's a couple of free programs out there, but essentially it just takes a bunch of stereo photographs and reconstructs a 3D model of them. We'll see some of those shortly. But the workflow is all about having a way that we can replicate the results. Is that I don't want these to be sort of one-off things. I want someone to be able to come in, say 10 years from now, replicate what I've done, and either say, yeah, John, you did a great job, or say, oh, something went wrong here. So having this documented process of how it's done is incredibly important. And the exact same thing happens with the laser scanning. So I have a sort of a custom laser scanning setup, or this is a structured light scanning setup that utilizes it holds the scanner precisely 10 centimeters away from the object. And similar thing is that you go through, you measure the object, you look at it, you document all of these sort of physical characteristics about it, the qualitative and the quantitative, and then you start to scan it. So scanning generally is sort of multiple different angles, different distances, different lighting conditions, all come together to produce a 3D model. So to kind of wrap this up, I just wanted to show a couple of the seals and sealings that we have. This is one of my absolute favorites. This is of a sort of advisor to the Magi in the Sasanian Empire, and it's 3630 or 3036-100, I believe is its a session number if you want to look at it. But one of the really sort of fascinating things is that you can create these 3D objects and play around with them however you want. That you can, move them around and look at them and really get up close and just play with them. And I think that's really one of the most fantastic things about this process, and being able to let other people, once these all get published onto the Metropolitan's website, other people to be able to see these and experience them in a completely new way, and perhaps a way that they've never really thought about Sasanian pieces of clay. And that's really the fantastic thing about it. So thank you so much.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Let me unpin you and we can have a discussion. So you can sort of unmute yourselves as well. Do you want to go first, Mark? And sort of, if you have any questions, because I have plenty. This is such an amazing and really important work that you're doing, John. Thank you.
I mean, I can throw some sort of softballs out there. I mean, my first thing that comes to mind is, John, have you thought about 3D printing ceilings from the Met collection and then using them as pedagogical tools?
That's a fantastic question. Exactly that. I really want to get some of these, either 3D print some of the seals or reverse engineer a ceiling, particularly like that, the one of the advisor to the Magi, reverse engineer that to create a sort of 3D printed seal of this, important official, and then using those to teach people about sealing practices, particularly with stamp sealing, because there are the Morgan Library does a fantastic job of having sealing workshops, so cylinder seals. But the stamp seal, it kind of gets, the cylinder seals are a lot more cool and interesting compared to stamp seals in the public imagination. So yeah, 3D printing these, 3D printing maybe even the ceilings to have as fun like little paperweights or something. I don't know, but yeah, definitely that's one of the things. And I'm actually not to be too long-winded on this, but I'm thinking of 3D printing some of the impressions, so the impressions of the seals, so that people can look at what the impression is on an actual large scale. So scaling them up and then being able to see the impression much larger than what, couple of centimeters that they kind of currently are. So I think that's a fantastic sort of didactic tool.
Yeah. I mean, one of the larger implications of your work is that some of these seals, I mean, the ones at the Met are really known, but other ones are not as well known in terms of their inscription. So the tool that you're providing could allow us to have a better reading of those inscriptions because it provides a more higher resolution photography. So I guess in continuation to that, I was wondering what other type of objects can you use this technology in particular to sort of read the inscriptions? I'm thinking particularly for my own sort of selfishly for the silverware, Sasanian or Parthian silverware that do have these inscriptions on them, or ostraca.
That's silverware is a little difficult because of kind of how reflective it is. It has both a difficulty with photogrammetry and with structured light scanning, but there are sort of ways around it. One of the things that I was kind of thinking about as I was starting this project was using RTI, or reflectance transformation imaging, which essentially has a camera in one place and then flashes go all around, and then you can sort of view a 2.5D image. And that one's really great for sort of inscriptions and the like. But again, it's kind of divorcing the object from the image and the image from the object. And with making these 3D models is that you're able to see the inscriptions in, incredible detail, whilst also seeing it in the context of the object and how it plays with itself. And to get to the idea of other types of objects that you scan, it's kind of limitless. With enough grit and determination, you can pretty much scan anything. So like I think this summer I'm going to do a couple of the Sasanian stuccos, 3D scan those to have kind of both as a didactic tool and kind of just for fun.
Yeah, why not? I was sort of fascinated to hear that there were still some traces of ropes in these bull eyes, and I was wondering if there's a possibility of testing them, or that's a sort of, I mean, it's beyond your project, I understand that, but that's super fascinating to hear.
Yeah, there's actually a couple of them. The small one that we saw with the winged ram has what looks like the charred remains of a rope inside of the string hole. So that's something that we're kind of working on with scientific research to send them down for sort of either non-destructive testing or kind of tiny little samples to see if we can kind of find any sort of interesting traces of organic matter that came from these. But yeah, there's so much, and just they really have never been looked at up close before. They've just kind of cursorily measured and drawn. So there's a ton of information, and just kind of building off of that, I've sort of identified probably about 20 seal impressions that are completely omitted in Richard in Fry's book. So they're kind of listed as unknown. But by looking at them, they're clearly either ones that have never been documented before or ones that are on other ceilings. So it's really sort of fantastic to expand our understanding and knowledge of these, little clay lumps.
Well, that's interesting. Continuation to what you were talking about. So there is a possibility that the previous sort of scholars have missed these images because they were not able to see them as clearly, and these would really allow some sort of visibility to them. And you did discuss somewhere that you are also thinking about like these clay bullae that their relationship from one seal to another. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting thing because we have particularly with the seal of one of the main priests of the province of Ardakshiwara is on, I think it's on 20 different sealings, and one of the interesting things is that it's slightly different for each one. So part of this 3D documentation and sort of precise measuring is we may be able to compare all of these impressions across these different sealings and basically understand the life of the seal, how it changed and how it was impressed differently on each subsequent seal, and perhaps could even come up with some sort of chronology of this is one of the more earlier ones that it's slightly less, there's less clay stuck inside, it's more sort of sharp versus the later ones that are slightly more degraded. So it is a really sort of interesting thing that we can start to draw all of these different connections between different sealings that seem otherwise kind of unrelated.
Wow, that's super fascinating. Mark, do you have any other questions?
Sure. I mean, I was just going to throw out another generalist question for the audience. How does this project, the Met, sort of interface with your dissertation work, John?
Excellent question. It doesn't really. So in my final chapter, I am discussing seals and sealings, and sort of the iconography on them and their how they can tell us about the formation of identity and the sort of display of identity in the late antique world. But this was more of a kind of, I think it's a really interesting project, and even if it's not related to my dissertation whatsoever, I think it's something worth doing. So it has been a little bit of a challenge, and some people that ask me about it are kind of shocked that it's not in my dissertation at all. But yeah, so it's kind of a totally separate thing that I think is just fun.
Mm. Well, we don't have Christian seals from sort of Qasr Abu Nasr. I don't remember any, but there are certainly some within the sort of realm of the Sasanian world.
Yes, yeah, and there's a couple at the Met, or at least ones that I'm arguing. You'll just have to read the dissertation to find out that I'm arguing are probably Christian or related to. But yeah, within the Qasr Abu Nasr corpus, there really isn't anything. But I do have. I was given a seal impression of. This is one of the new ones. This is an amulet that says it's Peros Duch's amulet that mentions in the name of Lord Jesus on it. So that was really fun.
Wow. That's amazing. Well, thank you so much. This is fascinating. We look forward to hearing more about your dissertation and the project. And basically, you have, I think, till midsummer to sort of get all these sealings done. Best of luck with that.
Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hopefully, we'll see you in a couple months for our 4th installment of Sasanica Speaker Series. Thank you.